Stop! You can't go out there! You can't!
In every pilot's life, there's a moment the rulebook can't help you. A moment where you have to choose between the orders you were given and the mission you were born for. The wind in the Aleutian Islands was a restless animal, never still, always biting. For Maya Callahan, it was the only thing that made the routine supply runs bearable. Today's job was simple: drop a crate of engine parts at a remote fishing outpost perched on a rocky cliff. It was a milk run, a job for a beginner, and it made her hands ache with boredom. As she approached the landing zone, the wind suddenly changed, coming in violent gusts off the cliff face. The designated landing approach, a wide, safe circle, was now directly in the path of the worst turbulence. The company manual, Frank Kramer's Bible, had a clear rule for this: abort the approach and wait. Maya sighed. Waiting wasn't in her nature. Instead of turning back, she pushed the helicopter, her beloved Hawk, into a steep, controlled descent. She hugged the side of the cliff, using the massive rock wall as a shield against the wind. It was a move that wasn't in any civilian handbook, a maneuver learned in the violent skies of an Air Force rescue mission. For a few tense seconds, the helicopter danced on a knife's edge. Then, with a final, gentle adjustment, she set the Hawk down on the landing pad as softly as a feather. The fishermen, who had been bracing for a rough landing, barely looked up from their work. The flight back was silent. As soon as she landed at the home base, her boss was waiting. Frank Kramer was a man who saw the world in checklists and regulations. He held a tablet in his hand, his face tight with disapproval. "That was a non-standard approach, Callahan," he said, his voice flat. "You were supposed to follow the prescribed flight path or turn back. It's in the manual." "The manual's path was a washing machine, Frank," Maya replied, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. "I used the cliff as a block. The landing was safer." "The landing was reckless," he countered. "It's the kind of hotshot flying you were supposed to leave behind in the military. Stick to the book. Is that clear?" Maya just nodded, her jaw tight. There was no point in arguing. Later that evening, long after everyone else had gone home, she stood alone in the quiet hangar. The air smelled of oil and cold metal. She ran her hand along the sleek, powerful body of the Hawk. This machine was a thoroughbred, built for impossible situations and high-stakes rescues. But under Kramer's command, she was using it as a delivery truck. She felt a familiar, frustrating ache deep in her chest. She was a pilot trained for the storm, and they had her flying in the calm. Every day felt like she was an eagle being asked to walk, a powerful engine forced to idle, and she didn't know how much longer she could stand it. The first sign of trouble was not a sound, but a feeling. A deep, violent shudder that came up from the concrete floor of the hangar. Maya was in the middle of her pre-flight check when the Hawk, a machine weighing several tons, rocked on its landing gear. A wrench clattered off a nearby workbench. The steady fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, then twice, before going dark, replaced by the stark red glow of the emergency backup system. The shaking lasted for 20 seconds that felt like an eternity. When it stopped, a heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant wail of an alarm siren. Maya was already sprinting towards the command center. The room, usually a place of quiet routine, was in chaos. People were shouting, phones were ringing, and static hissed from the main radio console. Frank Kramer stood in the center of it all, his face grim as he tried to get a handle on the situation. "What's the magnitude?" he yelled over the noise. "Initial reports say 8.2, centered 60 miles offshore," an operator answered, his voice tight with stress. The whole island chain felt it. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of dread. An earthquake that strong meant only one thing. "Get me a tsunami update. Now," Kramer ordered. As if on cue, a new voice cut through the radio static. It was weak and filled with panic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is St. Elias Station. Our power is out. Repeat, power is out. The comms tower is down. We are running on battery, but it won't last. The warning system is offline." Kramer grabbed a headset. "St. Elias, this is command. What is your status?" We're blind, command, the voice cried. The sea is pulling back. We need to get our warning system running before the wave hits. Our expert, she can't fix it from here. We need her on the island. Now. A woman with graying hair and a determined face stepped forward, holding a satellite phone. She had been trying to guide the St. Elias team remotely. She looked at Kramer, her expression urgent. I am Dr. Petrova, she said, her voice clear and steady despite the chaos. Their system is damaged, but I can bypass the main power and get the sirens working. But I have to be there. Those people need a warning. Kramer stared at the giant weather map on the main screen. A new, terrifying image was forming. A massive storm, born from the energy of the earthquake, was rapidly swirling into a monster, sitting directly between them and St. Elias Island. He looked at the frantic data, at the desperate face of Dr. Petrova, and at the impossible storm. The frustrating peace of the morning was gone, replaced by a crisis with a deadly, ticking clock. Frank Kramer called for order in the command center. The frantic shouting died down, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. All eyes were on the main screen, which showed a terrifying satellite image. A swirling mass of black and red clouds sat directly over the flight path to St. Elias Island. It was the storm, and it was a monster. Kramer stood before the screen, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked calm, but his voice was hard as stone. All right, listen up, he began. The situation on St. Elias is critical. Dr. Petrova needs to get there. However, he tapped a finger on the screen, pointing to the darkest part of the storm. The conditions are beyond our operational limits. Wind speeds are already exceeding 100 knots. The manual, Section 4, Paragraph C, is very clear. Flying into a storm of this magnitude is strictly forbidden. A wave of disappointed groans filled the room. Dr. Petrova looked pale, her hope draining away. So we're just going to wait? A young pilot asked. What about the people on the island? We will wait for a break in the storm, Kramer stated, leaving no room for argument. We do not risk our pilots or our aircraft. We follow protocol. That is final. Maya had been standing at the back of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. She had seen storms like this before. They were brutal, but they weren't solid walls. They had weaknesses. They had seams. She couldn't stay silent. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. The storm is the fastest route, not the only one, she said. Everyone turned to look at her. We can't go through it, but we might be able to go under it. If we fly the Hawk low, through the island channels, the cliffs will give us cover from the worst of the wind. Kramer turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. His face was a mask of cold disapproval. You are suggesting we fly a helicopter through narrow, rocky channels and hurricane-force winds? That's not a plan, Callahan. That's a gamble. It's the only chance they have, Maya insisted, taking another step forward. The Hawk can do it. I can do it. Kramer's expression hardened. He took a deliberate step towards her, lowering his voice so only she and those nearby could hear. Your kind of flying has no place here, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Your file is full of gambles. I am in charge, and I will not authorize a suicide mission based on your military hotshot instincts. The mission is a no-go. He turned his back on her, effectively dismissing her in front of the entire team. Maya stood there, frozen. The energy in the room was thick with tension. She had presented a solution, a risky one, but the only one they had. And she had been shut down, not by the storm, but by a wall of rules. For the people of St. Elias, the clock was ticking, and she was powerless to help them. Defeated in the command center, Maya didn't argue further. She simply nodded and walked away, letting everyone believe she had accepted the decision. But her mind was racing. She couldn't shake the image of the people on St. Elias, waiting for a warning that would never come. Kramer saw a wall of rules. Maya saw a puzzle that needed to be solved. She slipped into a small, forgotten office at the back of the building. It had an old computer terminal that no one used anymore. While Kramer and his team were watching the simplified, official weather models on the main screens, Maya began to dig deeper. She bypassed the standard software and started pulling the raw atmospheric data directly from the weather satellites. To most people, it would look like a meaningless jumble of numbers and pressure readings. To Maya, it was a language she understood. She saw not just the storm's power, but its shape. She saw how the wind was interacting with the unique, volcanic geography of the islands below. The official forecast just showed a solid block of red, meaning danger. The raw data showed something more, faint lines of slightly lower pressure, like tiny cracks in a massive wall. Her theory was forming, but she needed to be sure. She opened a secure, private messaging app on her phone and sent a short, coded message to a name only listed as Badger. He was her former Air Force meteorologist, a man who understood that weather wasn't just a science, but an art. Her message was simple: coastal storm. They say go high or go home. I see a path on the floor. Am I crazy? A minute later, a reply came back. Civilians only see the front door. You know where the servants' entrance is. Wind will be hell, but the cliffs should hold. Stay below 200 feet. Godspeed, Mav. That was all she needed. His confirmation solidified her plan. She spread a large, physical map of the island chain across the dusty desk. With a pencil, she began to draw a faint line, connecting the cracks she had seen in the data. The path was a serpent, twisting through narrow sea channels and hugging the massive volcanic cliffs. It was a route that no computer would ever suggest. It wasn't in any flight manual or on any official chart. It was dangerous. It was risky. It was probably insane. But as she looked at the finished line on the map, a quiet, intense focus settled over her. This was the unwritten path, a pilot's path, visible only to someone willing to look past the rules. Kramer saw an obstacle. Maya now saw a doorway. She just had to be brave enough to fly through it. Maya stood in the quiet office, staring at the hand-drawn line on her map. It was one thing to see a path, but another to actually fly it. Doubt began to creep in. Was Kramer right? Was she just being a reckless hotshot? The risk was enormous. If she was wrong, she wouldn't just be breaking the rules, she would be flying herself and Dr. Petrova to their deaths. Just as her resolve began to waver, a piercing blast of static erupted from the small emergency radio on the wall. It was a sound that made every pilot's blood run cold. It was an open channel, a cry for help from someone too desperate to follow protocol. A man's voice, choked with terror, tore through the speaker. It was garbled, but his words were terrifyingly clear. It's happening. Oh God, it's happening. The water, the whole harbor is emptying out. It's just gone. The sea is pulling back. Every person in the nearby command center froze. They all knew what that meant. A receding sea is the final, deadly breath a tsunami takes before it strikes. The wave was no longer a possibility, it was minutes away. Dr. Petrova, who had been anxiously pacing, rushed to the radio console, her face ashen. St. Elias, this is Petrova. How long ago did the water start to recede? The voice came back, cracking with fear. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. I don't know. How much time do we have? Dr. Petrova looked at the clock on the wall, her scientific calm completely shattered. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not to the radio, but to everyone in the room. He's not asking about the first wave from the earthquake. The aftershocks, they must have triggered a second, closer tsunami. A local one. They don't have an hour. They have maybe 15 or 20 minutes. At most. The words struck Maya with the force of a physical blow. 15 minutes. All her doubt, all her fear, all her respect for Kramer's rules vanished in that single, horrifying moment. This was no longer about her, or her career, or proving a point. It was about the faces of the people on that island, staring at an empty ocean, knowing death was rushing towards them. The image of the waiting fishermen from her supply run flashed in her mind. The time for planning in the shadows was over. The time for asking permission was gone. With a new, hard fire in her eyes, Maya folded her map, shoved it into her jacket pocket, and strode out of the office. She walked with a purpose that made people get out of her way. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was the island's only hope, and she was done waiting. Maya walked straight into the heart of the command center. The chaotic energy from moments before had turned into a stunned, helpless silence. Everyone knew the people on St. Elias were doomed. She walked right up to Frank Kramer, who was staring grimly at the useless weather map. She didn't ask. She didn't plead. She informed. "I'm taking Dr. Petrova to the island," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the quiet room. "I'm flying the Hawk." Kramer turned slowly, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I have already given my final order on this, Callahan. The mission is a no-go. We are not losing a pilot and a specialist on a flight that is against every regulation in the book." "Then the people on St. Elias will die by the book," Maya shot back, her voice unwavering. Dr. Petrova rushed to her side, looking at Kramer with pleading eyes. "He's right, Frank," the doctor said. "She is our only chance. You have to let her try." Kramer looked from Dr. Petrova's desperate face to Maya's iron will. He was trapped between his rigid rules and the absolute certainty of the disaster. He saw that Maya wasn't asking for his permission. She was on her way to that helicopter with or without it. To stop her now, he would have to physically restrain her, an act he knew he couldn't bring himself to do. He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of bitter defeat. "This is on you, Callahan," he said, his voice low and intense. "Every last bit of it. You break protocol, you are on your own." "Understood," Maya said with a sharp nod. She turned to Dr. Petrova. "Let's go." They ran from the command center, heading for the hangar as the wind howled outside. The ground crew, having heard the exchange over the open comms, looked at them with wide, uncertain eyes. "Get the Hawk ready," Maya commanded, and they jumped into action, fueling the helicopter with practiced speed. As Maya and Dr. Petrova strapped themselves into the cockpit, Kramer's voice came over the radio, cold and official for the record. "Be advised, all stations. Helicopter N4-9-0H is taking off against direct orders. This flight is logged as unauthorized. I repeat, unauthorized." Maya put on her headset, ignoring him. She looked at the controls in front of her, her hands moving with purpose. This was it. The point of no return. With a flick of a switch, the powerful rotors of the Hawk began to spool up. The low whirring sound grew into a deep, thundering roar, the sound of defiance, the sound of rules being broken for the right reason. It was the sound of Maya breaking free. With a final check, she pulled back on the controls, and the Hawk lifted into the raging storm. The moment the Hawk cleared the hangar doors, it was like flying into a solid wall. Rain slammed against the windshield in thick sheets, so heavy the wipers could barely keep up. The wind roared like a living thing, grabbing at the helicopter, trying to rip it from the sky. The small aircraft bucked and shuddered violently, tossed around like a toy in a bathtub. Dr. Petrova gasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the seat. Her eyes were wide with terror, looking out at the swirling gray chaos that surrounded them. Every muscle in Maya's body was tense as she fought the controls. The stick vibrated fiercely in her hand, and her feet danced on the pedals, making constant, tiny adjustments to keep the Hawk flying level. It was a brutal, physical battle against the raw power of the storm. The helicopter plunged suddenly, dropping several feet before Maya wrestled it back up. Alarms blared briefly in the cockpit, warning of dangerous wind shear. Outside, visibility was near zero. Maya had to trust her instruments, but even they were jumping wildly. "Can you see anything?" Dr. Petrova yelled over the deafening roar of the wind and the helicopter's engine. Maya shook her head, her eyes glued to the gauges. "Just gray. Hold tight." They flew low over the churning sea, the waves below looking like angry, white teeth. The wind slammed against the side of the Hawk, pushing them sideways. Maya fought back, leaning into the gust, her focus absolute. It felt like the storm was a giant, invisible hand trying to swat them out of the sky. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed outside the cockpit, so close it lit up the interior with a blinding white light, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very air around them. Dr. Petrova cried out, flinching violently. Maya gripped the controls even tighter, her jaw clenched. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. They flew on, battling their way deeper into the storm's heart. The rain became even heavier, turning into a near-solid curtain. The wind howled relentlessly, a constant, furious scream. Maya knew they were flying on the edge, pushing the hawk and herself to their limits. But she also knew that every minute they stayed in this fury was a minute closer to St. Elias and the people who were counting on them. There was no turning back now. They were in the storm, and they had to fly straight through it. Maya was following the path she had drawn on the map, a dangerous route that wound between the tall, rocky cliffs of the smaller islands. This was the unwritten path, the servant's entrance that her Air Force friend had mentioned. The towering cliffs gave them some protection, but the wind howled through the narrow channels, creating treacherous, swirling currents of air. She pulled the hawk into a sharp turn to navigate a tight passage. As she did, a monstrous wave crashed against the cliffside below them, sending a huge spray of salt water high into the air. The water slammed against the cockpit. For a moment, she was completely blind. Then, something worse happened. A shower of sparks erupted from the main navigation panel. The screen, which showed her altitude, speed, and the precious map of her route, flickered violently and then went black. A high-pitched warning tone screamed for a second before it, too, died with a sad little fizzle. The reassuring glow of the instruments vanished, plunging the cockpit into a dark, emergency-lit space. They were flying blind. A knot of ice-cold fear tightened in Maya's stomach. Without that screen, she had no map, no GPS, no way to know exactly where she was or what was ahead. For a single, terrifying second, Kramer's voice echoed in her head, "You are on your own." But then, years of training took over. Her panic was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a deep, powerful calm. The book was useless now. The technology was gone. All she had left was her skill. All she had was the hawk. "What's happening?" Dr. Petrova shouted, her voice tight with fear. "We're okay," Maya said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "Just flying old school now. Hold on." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, ignoring the useless, dark screen. She focused on the feel of the helicopter. Through the vibrating stick in her hand, she could feel what the wind was doing. She could feel the strain on the rotor blades, telling her how hard the engine was working. The hawk was talking to her, and she was listening. She looked down, not for a map, but at the churning, gray water below. She could read the patterns on the waves, seeing how the wind was being bent and twisted by the unseen cliffs ahead. She could feel a slight pull to the left, telling her a current of air was trying to push them towards the rocks. She was no longer just a pilot flying a machine. They were a team. Her instincts and the helicopter's power were connected. She was navigating with her gut, her hands, and a deep understanding of the chaos around her. It was dangerous, masterful flying. In the heart of the storm, without her technology, Maya had never felt more in control. Maya flew by instinct for what felt like an eternity. The hawk was an extension of her own body as she navigated the last of the treacherous sea channels, the roar of the wind her only guide. The storm fought her every inch of the way, throwing one last furious wall of wind and rain at them. She gritted her teeth, her arms aching from the constant struggle with the controls, and pushed the helicopter forward with everything she had. And then, suddenly, it was over. The hawk burst through the churning gray clouds into a world of strange, eerie calm. The deafening roar of the wind was gone, replaced by the steady whir of the helicopter's rotors. The torrential rain stopped completely. Below them lay the sheltered harbor of St. Elias Island, its waters dark and still, protected from the raging storm by the tall, volcanic peaks that surrounded it. They had flown through the wall and made it to the eye of the needle. A long, shaky breath escaped Maya's lips. She felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, so powerful it was hard to keep her hands steady. Dr. Petrova stared out the windshield, her mouth open in disbelief and awe. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." On the ground below, a small group of people were waving frantically from a clearing near the town's small clinic. It was their makeshift landing pad. Maya took a deep breath, pushed aside her fatigue, and began her descent. She landed the Hawk with a gentle touch that defied the brutal journey they had just endured. The moment the wheels touched the ground, the helicopter door was wrenched open. Two people helped the still-shaken Dr. Petrova out, rushing her towards the clinic where the warning system's controls were located. "This way, doctor." "Hurry," one of them shouted. Maya stayed in the cockpit, her hands still resting on the controls. She was too tired to move. She simply sat, listening to the sound of her own ragged breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. She had done her part. Now, it was up to Dr. Petrova. She watched the clinic door, waiting, hoping, praying they weren't too late. The seconds stretched into a minute, then two. The silence was agonizing. Then, a new sound split the air. It started low, then grew louder and louder, a powerful, rising wail that echoed off the mountains. It was the tsunami warning siren. It was a sound of alarm, a sound of danger, but to Maya, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was the sound of success. It was the sound of lives being saved. A wide, exhausted smile spread across her face as the siren blared across the island. The tension of the last hour finally broke, washing away in a profound, triumphant wave of relief. They had won. 2 days later, the storm was gone, leaving behind a world that felt clean and new. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Maya had spent most of that time ensuring the Hawk was repaired and ready, finding comfort in the familiar work. She knew a meeting with Kramer was coming. She expected to be fired, but she felt a sense of peace. She had made the right choice. The call came in the afternoon. "Callahan, my office." "Now." She walked into the quiet, tidy office and stood before his desk. The air was tense. Kramer didn't look angry. He just looked tired, and thoughtful. He gestured for her to sit, a courtesy he had never offered before. An official-looking report was sitting on the desk between them. Without a word, he slid the report across to her. Maya's heart pounded as she read the first page. It was a formal incident report. Her name was at the top. The summary detailed her actions clearly. Pilot took off against direct orders, flew into prohibited weather conditions, violated sections 4, 7, and 12 of the operational manual. She braced herself for the final line, the one that would end her career. But the last paragraph was not what she expected. It read, "The pilot's non-standard route and exceptional airmanship resulted in the successful delivery of key personnel, directly preventing a catastrophic loss of life on St. Elias." Her actions, while in violation of standard protocol, were undertaken in a time-critical, extreme circumstance where standard protocol was insufficient. She looked up at Kramer, confused. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "I spent my entire career following the book, Callahan," he said quietly. "The book keeps people safe. It works 99% of the time." He tapped the report with his finger. "But yesterday, it wouldn't have. My rules would have cost lives. Your risk saved them." He leaned back in his chair, a look of respect finally dawning in his eyes. "I read the book again last night," he continued. "I realized there was a chapter missing. A chapter on what to do when all the rules have failed. You wrote it." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a new assignment folder, sliding it across the desk to her. It was thick. On the tab, in bold letters, it read, "Lead Pilot, Rapid Response Team." Maya stared at the folder, then at him, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was more than a promotion, it was an acknowledgement. It was trust. She had been grounded by a man who only saw the rules. Now, he was seeing the pilot. She picked up the folder, her new future in her hands. She had flown straight into the storm and had not only saved an island, but she had also found her rightful place in the sky. Thank you for joining us on Maya's incredible flight through the storm. If her story of courage and determination moved you, please give this video a like. It helps more people discover stories like this. Know someone who'd appreciate a tale about trusting their instincts? Share it with them. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Was Maya right to defy her orders to save lives? And if you don't want to miss our next story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.